Every NBA fan knows that over time, the game of basketball has changed drastically. We've seen different eras, styles of play, and generational athletes come through this sport. Each position in basketball has gone through its changes, like the rise of big guards, or the decrease in small guards across the league, or even the evolution of stretch bigs. But no position has taken a bigger hit than power forwards. The death of the four has affected the way we view basketball, and some may not even realize it. This impact goes all the way down to college and even high-level high school hoops. It's changed the way college coaches recruit and how NBA GMs draft. But where did this shift start, and how much of a change has really happened over the past 30 to 40 years? One of the most impactful positions in the league, slowly fading away into basketball history. Power forwards were once the premier position in basketball. In the 80s and early 90s, it was seen as a huge advantage to have an elite power forward in your lineup at the time. Even in the late 90s and early to late 2000s, some of the best players to ever play this sport were in the front court. But now, we rarely see this much production and longevity come from this position. And why is that? There's a long list of reasons why that's the case, but before we can even look at that, we have to see how this position has changed on paper. To help visualize this change, I found every starting power forward for every team every year since 2005. You can see how much the average height and weight for each season has changed up to this point. There's not that much of a difference in height, even though the average height has gotten smaller, but the biggest difference is the weight. You see, there was a brief period during the late 2000s where power forwards actually got lighter, but that didn't last long as the average weight shot back up in 2010. But since then, it has drastically declined. Each season, starting power forwards weigh less, and this season, it's expected to be over 20 pounds smaller across the league. This weight difference has equated to more agile players and more ball skills overall. So now that we have some context on paper, how are these areas of the position separated by actual styles of play? The power forward position has gone through, in my opinion, 4 different phases. First, we have the true bruisers from the 80s and 90s. Guys like Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, Dennis Rodman, Kevin McHale, and a bunch of other Hall of Fame guys graced the low post in that era. They set the tone for physicality in the NBA, all while playing in the slowest paced game the league has ever seen. Then we have the post scorers, or what I like to call the Finesse Fours, from the late 90s to around 2012. Some of the best bigs this game has ever seen have played in this era. They made their mark posting and facing up to the basket, showing some of the most skills seen in league history. Alongside Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, and KG, we witnessed Chris Webber, Paul Gasol, LaMarcus Aldridge, and the early stages of Blake Griffin. But then a huge shift started to happen where we saw the beginning of the end of true post scoring from power forwards, and a mix of the playmaking bigs we see today during the Fusion 4 era from the mid-2010s to 2019. This was the start to where power forwards really started to get guard skills, and laid the foundation for the forwards that we see in today's game. Blake Griffin was the biggest example of this shift, as he completely changed his game to adapt to the style of play the NBA was headed towards, and put together an elite season with the Pistons late in his career. We also got to see the prime of Kevin Love, Carmelo Anthony, and the rise of Anthony Davis. And lastly, the era we are currently in, the big wings. This is the closest that power forwards have ever been in comparison to the guards in today's NBA. A complete 180 to the skill sets we saw in the past, with Jason Tatum, Kawhi Leonard, and DeMar DeRozan leading the way for a number of big wings at the 4 position. But what separates each of these stages' skill set, and how has this death that I've stated actually happened? Well, back during the late 80s and early 90s, those true bruisers made their money abusing defenses in negative space. Lineups consisted of 2 and sometimes 3 non-shooters in the front court and played specifically inside the arc. Back then, it was a luxury to have an elite power forward, as teams wanted to run their offense through their forward. The shot diet from players like Barkley, Terry Cummings, Antoine Carr, and others was strictly at the rim and in the mid-range, coming off of deep cross screens and playing with their backs to the basket. This shot selection attributed to poor spacing that guards had to work with. It was all due to the skill sets of power forwards at the time. But now, that high volume of inside the arc production from forwards drastically declined. Dating back to 1996 when this data was first tracked, The amount of mid-range jumpers taken by forwards has decreased well over 50%. Last season, the most middies taken by forwards for a team per game was 9 by the Spurs. That would be bottom 5 for a team every season until 2011, and in the bottom half of the league until 2016. And the post-up decline has been no different. The frequency of post-ups have declined by 50% since it was first tracked in 2015. That's only a decade. Imagine how much bigger that gap will be from the 80s and 90s. This style of play, however, was not followed by 100% of the NBA during the early 2000s or the era of the Finesse Fours. The Finesse Fours were led by some of the greatest back-to-the-basket players of all time, like Tim Duncan, Dirk, Kevin Garnett, Chris Webber, and early-age Zach Randolph. But there's a small window where coaches became innovative to change the way they operated offensively. Two of the most influential coaches ever that I don't think anyone really acknowledges anymore, Mike D'Antoni and Stan Van Gundy. In 2003 to 2007, these two coaches pushed forward at that time a unique playstyle and lineup construction. I made an entire video about these two teams over a year ago, but they prioritized floor spacing with the three-point and ball handling threat from their power forwards. Now during that mid-2000s era, basketball was still seen as a slower, more structured offensive game than today. The court was much more compact in terms of spacing, but D'Antoni and Van Gundy completely flipped that philosophy and molded the game into what we see today. The 2004 Suns and their 7-second offense revolutionized moving a traditional power forward to center and a small forward to power forward, but this change almost didn't happen.
And then even then, if I remember correctly, it wasn't the first 2 or 3 games. It took about 5 games to get Amari completed at the 5 and get it together. I was still a little nervous about going in because what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? And and you have other people that, on your staff or just all in good faith don't believe in, Amari's not going to be able to play the 5.
Right.
So it took a while to get some toughness and do what I thought was right.
This was Shawn Marion's first season ever playing the 4. He was only 6'7", 220, and at that time was very undersized for that position. But this move shifted the way offense was viewed. The Suns had the most 3-point attempts per game from forwards that season, as well as the most ever in NBA history up to that point. And the team hadn't shot as many attempts all the way until the Cavs a decade later in 2015. And in contrast to that, they had the lowest percentage of 2-point field goal attempts per game from forwards in the entire league that year, and the lowest during that decade until Stan Van Gundy's Orlando Magic broke that mark in 2007. From 2007 to 2010, Van Gundy orchestrated one of the most influential offensive systems in the past 20 years during the Finesse Four era, his 4-out, 1-in. Just like D'Antoni, he moved Rashard Lewis, a traditional small forward, to power forward for the first time 10 years into his career. During his prime years in Seattle, Lewis grew his offensive game on the perimeter, and Van Gundy recognized this. So with his prioritizing of space, he made the switch. What made this work so well was how dominant Dwight Howard was at the time out of the pick and roll. When bigs rolled to the rim, teams were so accustomed to tagging hard on that roll with their 4-man, since they typically weren't shooters. And Dwight got a lot of attention at the rim, so with Lewis, he was able to spot up, and this was a huge advantage. You see here, the goal of the Hawks defense is to stop that Gortat roll with a tag from the weak side. That leaves the wing open, forcing rotations in an open 3. With Rashard Lewis, this same concept was happening, and having Dwight as an even bigger threat at the rim made both of them complement each other so well in the front court. Current Lakers head coach JJ Redick was a big piece on those Magic squads, and he acknowledged how teams weren't ready for this shift at the time, how the Magic and the Suns were the first teams with these type of lineups, and why Lewis at the 4 worked so well early on.
We always said, or at least I thought you guys had the best offense in the NBA, or at least like the toughest to guard when it's like, was it Turk, Dwight, like
Rashard
Lewis and everything.
Yeah. Petrus.
Yeah, was it 4-out, 1-in?
The league,
and you guys could really shoot.
The problem was the league, and it changed quickly. The league basically realized you can't tag the roller with the 4-man every time, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden the stretch 4 died because all of a sudden everybody just, I'm gonna play Iguodala at the 4. I'm gonna play Tatum at the 4, right?
Yep.
And I'm just switch everything. So it was kind of like a small window for us to win. But like it was, I think it was, my look on it is, it was Phoenix first, then it was us, then it was y'all, then it was the Rockets, and then like that's the game now.
Rashard was one of the few introductions for power forwards at this time who were truly agile and could create for themselves, all while shooting the 3-ball. So in an era of elite back-to-the-basket bigs that produced multiple Hall of Famers and top 15 players, this still created a snowball effect and helped influence the Fusion Fours, or what I like to call the beginning of the end. At this point in the mid-2010s, the volume of threes taken started to increase, and this impacted how bigger players played and how lineups were put together. In 2012, the start of the Fusion 4 era, the league-wide amount of threes taken reached a record, over 49,000, a 13,000 shot increase from the year before. This made teams be more willing to push players out of the league that weren't a threat on the perimeter, regardless of if they had other elite abilities elsewhere. An example of this, the New York Knicks. In 2011, Amari Stoudemire was their primary power forward, but after that year he started 0 games at power forward for the next 3 seasons, as the Knicks decided to move Carmelo Anthony, one of the best small forwards in the world at that time, to the 4. And the rest was history. He gained MVP votes, All-NBAs, a scoring title, and never moved back to small forward from that point on in his career. Another example during this time was LeBron and the Miami Heat. Bron had never started at power forward with the Cavs, and even his first few years in Miami. But in 2013, the Heat moved away from Haslam at the 4 in favor of Bron and inserted Shane Battier to small forward. This resulted in their most 3-point attempts in the season since 1996. Using Bron at the 4 with a spaced out offense gave one of the most athletic players ever the ability to drive and kick to open shooters. This also let Miami run pick and rolls with their front court and force teams to load up and into rotations. But like I said earlier, this evolution of the position affected more than just the NBA. College recruits during this time really started to gain ball skills, all while keeping their true power forward attributes in their game. This is when one of the most skilled power forwards ever came into the league, towards the end of the careers of 3 legends. Anthony Davis came into the league at 221 pounds, full of potential to be an elite 3-level scorer at the power forward position. The beginning of his career came at the perfect time. A transition of perimeter-oriented basketball was happening, and what better young star to build around than a 6'10" athletic and savvy hooper just coming off one of the best individual college basketball seasons ever. And his best year so far in his career came playing the 4 next to one of the most skilled big men in the league at the time with DeMarcus Cousins. The Pelicans felt so comfortable playing Boogie next to AD because of how skilled Davis was both off the dribble and inside. Double bigs typically aren't this effective unless a rare occurrence of at least one of your bigs being able to put the ball on the deck. Fortunately for New Orleans at the time, both of theirs could. This is the best example of the growth of power forwards during this time, getting a stop defensively out of the mid-post, leading the break and finishing at the rim. And then running a 5-4 pick and roll with your power forward slipping behind the defense for a lob. This tandem showed the true evolution of the position. 2 interchangeable bigs who made money going downhill from the perimeter, spotting up from 3, and in the post. But my favorite case in the death of old school power forwards, and the best example of these Fusion Fours, was right at the end of this era in 2018 with Blake Griffin. Griffin, most notably the staple of the Lob City Clippers, was primarily a lob threat and stayed far away from the perimeter offensively. He was so dominant rolling to the rim that over time he started to pop off screens, but only in the mid-range at first. From his rookie year to 2016, you can see how much of his production was inside the arc, but he recognized the shift that was happening in the league, so he adapted. Towards the end of his Clippers tenure, he started to slowly round out his game on the perimeter. In 2016, he shot over 100 threes for the first time in his career, and the following season, he nearly doubled that total. Griffin also got really good putting the ball on the floor and creating for himself. But in 2018, he was traded to the Pistons, and this was the start of, in my opinion, one of the greatest examples of the biggest shift that power forwards went through. One of the most dominant above the rim and rolling bigs in the world, transforming his game into an elite 3-level threat. He took only 500 threes and shot only 106 mid-range jumpers the entire season, which was by far the lowest of his career at that point. This honestly is one of my favorite developments from a player and overall season from someone in recent memory. He completely changed his game in the blink of an eye and made the All-Star team and All-NBA team for the first time in 6 seasons, while playing in a way that translated to carrying the load for a below-average Pistons team into the playoffs. Blake being able to initiate these 4-5 pick and rolls with efficiency was such a huge development in his game that many didn't see coming. This is a 6'9", 250-pound power forward rejecting ball screens and finishing off the dribble like this. Griffin averaged .99 points per possession as a ball handler in pick and rolls, and was among the 87th percentile of the entire league in these actions. And this was a stepping stone for the power forward era we're currently in, the big wings. Like the chart I showed earlier, forwards are much more lighter in weight, which has resulted in guard skills for the position across the entire league. Power forwards today have a lot more responsibility on both sides of the ball than ever before. Almost each of them nowadays are the primary ball handler on the perimeter for offenses, something that we never imagined happening 15 to 20 years ago and beyond. You will not watch a game today and see a power forward on the court who can't create for themselves off the dribble. We have guys like Jason Tatum, who over time has grown in a position as a much more polished playmaker than just a scorer. After trading Marcus Smart, the Celtics have demanded Tatum to be the primary ball handler almost all of every game, and he's making reads, especially out of pick and rolls, that he hasn't made in the past. And this ability helps maximize the way offensive systems are ran in today's NBA. Everyone knows now that pick and rolls are the staple of today's game, but inverted pick and rolls are ran at a higher clip than ever before. This is the new age of the NBA. KD gets a screen from Booker, who rolls, and with the tag from the low man, Bradley Beal's wide open. Then directly on the other end, LeBron gets a screen from Vincent and he rolls to the rim and finishes the and one. And in OKC, their 7'2" big man Chet Holmgren comes off the double pin down with the center rolling, but Chet with the switch goes downhill and punches it at the rim. But the Celtics do this more than anyone. Since Joe Mazzulla has taken over, he's constructed somewhat of a backwards offense that goes against traditions. Along with JT as the lead man, they use their guards as screeners and in the dunker spot more than anyone. With the skill set their big wings have, they're able to exploit this advantage, creating the most dominant system in NBA history. Here Tatum uses the screen from Pritchard and draws a strong side help, leaving Brown wide open. They call this a killer whale offense, where they just hunt for mismatches, or seals which they like to call it, which Halliburton is here. They don't want to switch him onto the bigger Tatum, making Drew open on the pop. On this short corner inverted pick and roll, Tatum doesn't even need to dribble to recognize when Horford cuts to clear the weak side corner open for Hauser. Being able to have your 4-man draw this much attention off the dribble and just take what the defense gives him opens up a world of opportunities for your offense. This style of play has made its way onto other teams, with the most surprising team in the NBA right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs and new head coach Kenny Atkinson have found success in these inverted actions thanks to the evolution of Evan Mobley. With his improvements on the ball, he has now become their point guard in a lot of their offense. The new staff has put emphasis on Mobley becoming more versatile offensively.
Right, and Stan, to your point, a huge emphasis for Evan Mobley from the coaching staff to him, and him personally was working on his versatility. They wanted him to increase his ability to ball handle. He wants to shoot threes more often. Kenny Atkinson told us if he has space, get the three up. And Evan told me if he passes up the three, he'll hear it from coach on the bench. But he's getting more comfortable. Coach said he even surprises him sometimes with his handles, but he really wanted to show his well-rounded game. He still loves to catch it at the elbow and face up the best, though.
Yeah, well, we'll see him later tonight handle the ball in pick and rolls also. I mean, they've really increased the opportunities he has offensively.
And Mobley has taken on the added responsibility very well. He looks much more comfortable creating for himself on the perimeter, and the Cavs offense is reaping the benefits of these improvements. This is your 7-foot power forward rejecting ball screens at the start of the possession and having his way downhill. Off of rebounds and early in the shot clock, he's been super aggressive getting to his spots. They use these inverted pick and rolls a lot in these situations to give Mobley favorable spacing to draw this foul. And again off a miss with the inverted pick and roll, he has the entire paint all to himself and takes advantage. And the biggest growth in his game has been his playmaking and this pick and roll production. Mobley had only 22 possessions as a ball handler in the pick and roll last year and 29 in 2022. In 17 games this year, he is already up to 28. He makes a lot of money with these guard screeners. When a big defender switches, he's too slow. But when the guard hedges and tries to recover, it's usually too late. And sometimes he doesn't even need to get the assist to affect the play. Here, Garland sets the go screen, and Mobley recognizes Harris helping out the corner. This forces Detroit into rotation, and Jerome draws a foul. Mobley and Tatum, among many other starting power forwards, are elite on the perimeter given their tall frames. But there are some teams that are completely going against history norms for their 4 spot. Unlike in the early 2010s before the Knicks, Heat, and others made the change, it's accepted in today's game to have someone undersized at the 4 due to the offensive advantage they bring. And it's even more of an incentive if they're elite on defense. The Knicks and Thunder are the biggest examples of this, with OG Anunoby and Jalen Williams being elite or very solid defenders. This allows both teams to run these type of lineups despite the height disadvantage, something that was never a thing in the past. New York and their new lineups work so well because they have arguably the most versatile defender in the whole league with OG Anunoby. He's your modern day 3-and-D power forward, 6'7" with a 7'2" wingspan that can guard 1 through 5 and shoot 40% from 3. He fits so well with New York because of things like this. First, he's in the paint scrapping with Şengün, then at the rim off straight vertical he blocks a layup. The Knicks use him a lot as a low man defensively because of his range. He's square with the ball and his man in the corner, then off vert again meets wide at the rim. And this shows the versatility. OG switches onto Dame from Giannis and stays level with him to get the block. And Anunoby has consistently been a threat against bigger guys despite his size, but recently, the Thunder have took it a step further and are playing all perimeter players due to the injuries to their centers. OKC is so confident we're running former Santa Clara star Jalen Williams at power forward because of his versatility from his length. He's 6'5" with a 7'2" wingspan. This gives him switchability 1 through 5 against most teams in the league. Like I said, he's been starting at center the past few weeks. Here he's on Messi in the paint, and helps on a roll and shows his instincts and length for back-to-back ridiculous blocks, then runs the court and draws a foul. Here again, he helps off of Gafford to meet Marshall at the rim. What makes him such a unique power forward is that he played point guard his final year in college. Just another example of how the high school and college levels breed these skill sets into a positionless game. With switching on defense being more popular than ever due to the high dosage of pick and rolls in today's game, championship level teams have a non-negotiable for their power forwards. They have to be elite guarding both bigs and guards. Having an on-ball threat defensively from your forward was never really that important before the 2010s, but now it's a huge priority for roster construction. And basketball always evolves, so I of course expect the power forward position to go through a new phase as well. With upcoming stars like Paolo Banchero, Scotty Barnes, and Jalen Johnson who are arguably the best playmakers on their team, I see a world where offenses are strictly ran through power forwards on the perimeter. Teams are already slowly prioritizing that their forwards use these abilities, so in the next few years, I expect to see teams continue to push small forwards and even shooting guards down their lineups in hopes to have guard skills across the entire floor. That's somewhat the case now, but there are still a few instances where forwards that aren't a threat beyond the arc and off the dribble are on the floor. But in the future, I expect that to be completely wiped out. I also think that the average starting power forward's weight will continue to decline as forwards will keep getting lighter and more agile. Cause with the big wings, guys are getting taller and taller with elite skills on the perimeter. And with generational young stars like Cooper Flagg and Cameron Boozer, who are elite two-way players at these stages of their careers, eventually joining the league next to the already talented young big wings, the power forward position that we currently know today will never die. But the one we once knew and grew up on during an era of gritty old school hoops is long gone.